Today, we're talking about how I'm lucky to be alive right now, but not because I suffered any near death experience. Somehow, we're going to make our way to lessons learned from COVID, but this isn't your typical lessons learned. I'm hoping to throw a dash of optimism into the mix and share how our experience might allow us to make progress against malaria. Ready? Let's go.
Wouldn't it be?
I was the youngest kid in my class to wear glasses. In kindergarten, you can see the pictures, I had these giant glasses on. My eyesight continued to deteriorate to the point where each eye was minus 8.5. For those not familiar with this description, that means I was nearsighted to the point where I can't focus on images beyond 5 inches in front of me. So literally, without glasses or contact lenses, I can't see the number of fingers on my own hand held in front of me. It never bothered me. I switched to contact lenses by 5th grade, and then I got LASIK when I was 30. But one time, it must have been after some athletic triumph of mine where I was talking trash unnecessarily, I remember a friend saying to me, "Arvind, just think, if you were born when we were hunter-gatherers, you'd already be dead." That thought really stuck with me. Here I was thinking I was designed pretty damn well for this world. But really, I was hugely dependent on time. Even 1,000 years ago, there was nothing even close to corrective glasses that would have helped my eyesight. I couldn't help but appreciate how lucky I was. Ever since that little comment, I've always returned to these mini thought experiments on how lucky I am to be alive. Let me give you another one. Ugh, in case you don't know, that was the sound of mosquito buzzing. Amplified, obviously. Sends chills down my spine. Let me just tell you, mosquitoes love me. I mean, love me. Something about my propensity for heavy sweating and my natural scent, I don't know. Like, if you go on a hike with me, you probably don't need bug spray because I'll be taking the hit for all of us. My grandmother used to tell me it was because my blood was sweet, so maybe that's it. Whatever it is, I'm basically a walking all-you-can-eat buffet for mosquitoes. Forget 1,000 years ago. If I was born in a poor part of sub-Saharan Africa instead of the wealthy suburbs of Detroit, forget education, forget income, forget happiness. There's a good chance I wouldn't have survived due to my sweet blood alone. Malaria is the 3rd most prolific killer globally of children under 5. Killing over 250,000 children under 5 each year, predominantly in sub-Saharan Africa. So, I'm lucky to be alive. This is how crazy the world is. Instead of malaria being my potential killer, I instead got a job working on malaria programs in Asia and Africa almost precisely a decade ago. I became a world expert in understanding the entire malaria supply chain. And believe me, it's fucked up. In fact, I spent 1.5 years where I got paid to talk about, understand, and communicate ways to better distribute malaria drugs. In all that time, I never even noted the irony. It's as if there was a serial killer on the loose targeting people that looked a lot like me. But meanwhile, I was so safe, due to nothing but lucky circumstance, that I was paid to provide news coverage of this killer without ever having to worry for a moment for my own life. But why are we talking about malaria? Well, there are these vaccines that have been in the news. No, not the COVID vaccines. I'm talking about the malaria vaccines. Last week, a malaria vaccine developed by Oxford University was found to have 77% efficacy in phase 2 trials. The trials of this vaccine started in 2019 before the pandemic. And last month, a team at Yale patented a RNA-based technology to vaccinate against malaria. So it seems like we have a little bit of momentum on the vaccine front against malaria. Before this pandemic, the fastest ever vaccine to go from development to deployment was the mumps vaccine in the 1960s. Took about 4 years. For COVID, it took less than 12 months. Our process for developing the vaccine thus far has been one of the few bright spots in how the world has handled COVID. To have several vaccines tested at scale so quickly is a testament to the powers of science and capitalism harnessed in the right way. So, I'm going to ask an obvious question. Wouldn't it be awesome if we could develop and deploy malaria vaccines with the same urgency? Wouldn't it be awesome if we had a malaria vaccine to deploy in 2022? Wouldn't it be awesome if we had a way to support the development process, to make it happen faster, to donate, to be a part of a challenge trial, something to make this a more realistic possibility? I'm going to give you 2 reasons why I think it's important. The first moral and the second practical. Let's go moral first. Let's compare COVID numbers to malaria numbers. To date, over 15 months since the pandemic began, we've had 150 million cases of COVID. There are over 220 million cases of malaria each year. To date, over 15 months, there have been roughly 3.1 million deaths due to COVID. In 2019, the last year with reliable data, we lost 409,000 individuals due to malaria. Yes, that's 1/6 the number of deaths, but it's not even a full order of magnitude less. And it happens every year. And consider this. I haven't been able to find global numbers, but in the US, while over 500,000 Americans have died due to COVID, they have been disproportionately older Americans. Less than 150 American children under the age of 15 have died due to COVID. Compare that with malaria, where over 250,000 children under 5 were killed by this terrible parasite. 250,000 kids under 5. I don't want to be accused of ageism, but I'll just say, I have 2 daughters under 5. If there was anything like the kind of risk that malaria poses in sub-Saharan Africa, here in North Carolina, my daughters would be living in hazmat suits and never leaving the house until we had a vaccine. Yes, there are important differences between malaria and COVID in terms of how we can treat it once we have it, the disease itself. But it's hard to believe that if malaria was as big a problem in the developed world as it was in the developing world, that we wouldn't already have a vaccine. That's the moral case. Now, here's the practical one. There's a terrifying but important podcast that Sam Harris released with Rob Reed, a science fiction author. I'm going to play a short clip from it to make a point, but I encourage you to listen to the whole thing.
COVID is our dress rehearsal for handling something much worse. And in lots of places, certainly including the United States, it's been one of the most disastrous dress rehearsals in the history of theater. It's like half the actors forgot all their lines. A quarter got bizarrely doctored scripts, which have them saying and doing the opposite of what they're supposed to do. The lights have caught fire, half the costumes didn't show up, and disease is spreading throughout the cast. To step out of the dress rehearsal analogy, I'm referring to things like the ongoing disaster connected to adequate COVID testing and timely results, our early lack of PPE, our all but non-existent contact tracing, the lethal politicization of slowing infection via masks, etc. In an October editorial, the normally sober and understated New England Journal of Medicine frankly stated that, quote, "The magnitude of this failure is astonishing." And remember, this is just a dress rehearsal. Opening night is coming. Which means that as we do the post-mortem on this botched rehearsal, it's vital that we start planning maniacally for the next pandemic. That we start thinking obsessively about all the cannonballs we've had the great fortune to partially dodge lately. That we consider the next set of cannonballs which are inevitably on their way. And that we humbly acknowledge that no one's luck lasts forever.
Seems like the perfect time for a winter is coming Game of Thrones reference. Joking aside, he makes this point really effectively. We can all acknowledge we could have handled COVID a lot better globally. Over 3 million individuals did not have to die. Our schools did not have to be closed for so long. Our economy did not have to be turned upside down. Even if vaccine development and scale-up was a bright spot, we're still struggling with vaccine deployment, and the politicization of the vaccine as we try to reach herd immunity. But has this been a dress rehearsal? Is it really a matter of when, not if, the next pandemic comes? Let's let Rob Reed continue.
For one thing, the rate of diseases jumping over from animals to the human population is rising dramatically as we encroach ever more on natural habitats. So nature is taking potshots at us with increasing frequency. As for artificial viruses, there's no reason they'll hit us at nature's relatively leisurely recent pace of one major scare every 5 to 10 years, because the cadence will be determined by the people behind them. All this means that humanity's future depends on keeping our guard up if and when we put COVID-19 into the grave. And I mean way up, preparing for absolute worst-case scenarios. Natural pandemics are random case scenarios because evolution is driven by blind chance. But nothing will be random about a virus designed by a malicious and murderous party.
You're going to have to listen to the whole thing to go down the scary rabbit hole of a man-made biological terrorist attack. But hopefully, you don't have to be convinced of a man-made biological terrorist attack to acknowledge that there's a valid point about keeping our guard up. In our globalized world, we have seen that disease can spread fast. There were many elements of COVID that made it more benign than a potential future disease. One that could spread more rapidly, one that could be asymptomatic for longer, or kill at a higher rate. But what does keeping our guard up as a society have to do with the malaria vaccine?
Unfortunately, we don't have a great track record for keeping our guard up after a major disease scare has passed. Despite all the close calls of recent years, civilian biosecurity funding fell by 27% between 2015 and 2019, according to The Economist magazine. The Economist also tells us that after the swine flu pandemic petered out, European and American governments reneged on contracts with vaccine makers, leaving them hundreds of millions of dollars in the hole. In light of this, we should consider the finale of one of the most popular TED Talks of all time, in which Bill Gates warns against the dangers of complacency. He wraps up by saying, if anything good can result from the current outbreak, quote, it's that it can serve as an early warning, a wake-up call to get ready. If we start now, we can be ready for the next epidemic. Unfortunately, Gates didn't get his wish, because as many of you probably know, he wasn't talking about COVID, but Ebola. That talk was recorded over 5 years ago. And of course, we were far, far from ready for the coronavirus outbreak that followed it.
Scary to think about. We are just not good at keeping our guard up for intangible threats. Look at our response to climate change. In this case, when it comes to pandemics, a malaria vaccine could make the threat tangible. It allows us an opportunity to keep our guard up while also eliminating one of humanity's greatest scourges. We don't know the shape the next pandemic will take, but we know that rapid vaccine development, scale-up, and effective deployment will be critical to keeping it under control if it escapes initial containment efforts. What better way to practice that skill than using malaria as a trial run? Bill Gates, you gave that famous TED Talk 5 years ago. Now, it's time to put your money where your mouth is. Let's learn the lesson from COVID and let's create a sense of urgency for malaria vaccine development. Let's strengthen the global apparatus for developing and deploying vaccines so that it's a muscle capable of fighting whatever nature or terrorists choose to unleash on us. The clock is ticking. That's all on malaria for today. Before we go, one more thing.
Welcome to Kids Corner.
This week, we're at dinner with the family. I look at my 4-year-old, and she's using her hand to smush the vegetable rice in her plate. What are you doing?
I need to flatten my food. It tasted better that way. I want to that Disney anymore. It tasted better now.
Okay, if you say so. Take a bite. Let's see if it worked.
That's good. Did I have a napkin?
No, not until you're done. You wanted to flatten the food, and now you have to face the consequences. Fast forward a few moments.
I'm not drinking any water.
Why?
I'm not drinking any more water until you duck me in nothing. Is that fair enough?
What? That is not how things work.
If I held my laptop, it would be all dirty.
I hate when you outsmart me. Anyways, that's it this week. Thanks a lot for listening.
Wouldn't it be be?